All right. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture Podcast. This is episode 25.
Round two.
I'm your host, round two. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined as always by the dashing Philip Leitz. And before we jump into introducing our guests and get into the good stuff, I want to give a quick shout out to Dylan on the Animals at Home Network for hosting us on his platform.
The GOAT.
And I also want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our sponsors. And with that out of the way, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Colin Marshall. Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing really well.
Yeah.
Glad to have you. It feels like this has been a long time coming. We had to reschedule. Did we reschedule twice or just once? I don't know. There's been a lot of chaos.
I think just once.
Okay. Okay, good.
Maybe twice actually. But I think one of them
Yeah.
was like only like a little miniature, like you caught it fast kind of thing.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a little
Something
bit
like
of
that.
the last like 6 weeks has been kind of just a mess over here. But I appreciate you bearing with us, and I'm really glad that we finally got it on the books.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, with like the holidays, and this is the first, we are very green in the podcast realm and trying to figure out how to do this and how to keep organized, and that plus the holidays and plus the other things that we both do during the day. It's one of those things where stuff just kind of slips and we're like, oh yeah, damn it, we've got this, and now I've got too many conflicting things, and hopefully I think this year, I think 2023, we're gonna knock it out of the park. I bet we don't have one reschedule all year. You watch, Roy.
All right, I'm gonna hold you to that. Here we
No,
go.
don't hold me to that. I'm probably
Here we go.
yeah.
Well, anyway, with all that silliness out of the way, Colin, I'm curious if you could just share a little bit with the listeners about your background, kind of how you fit into herpetoculture or animal husbandry as a whole.
Yeah. I am a public aquarist. I work at public aquariums, zoos, or museums, normally taking care of animals in aquariums. So normally fish, but also invertebrates, and more often than not, at a lot of institutions, herps kind of fall on us as well. Personally, I've always tried to do my best to keep it. I don't like to get too specialized with what I do. At least from like a species perspective, I don't disrespect anybody who does specialize in like a certain genus or anything like that. I think that's really cool, but I've always, variety is the spice of life to me. The reason I really like animals, or one of the big reasons I think, is that they're just so many of them. So I've worked with a lot of different herps over the years, and I was a hobbyist for a long time. I don't keep any what I would call hobby herps anymore. I have a pet tortoise, and I have a fish tank with just like some big dopey old cichlids that I never wanted to get rid of. So uh, yeah, I guess I would say I'm an ex hobbyist who managed to turn it into a profession around the same time.
Was what was the point when you knew aquarist was going to be the way you were headed? Was that something that you wanted to do for a long time? There were like a specific moment.
Yeah. When I was very, very young, my parents were really great at taking me to places like zoos or aquariums. Um, and I very specifically remember going to SeaWorld as a
Nice.
really little kid and seeing the orca trainers and being like, that. Um, I'm 30, so this was also right around the time that Free Willy came out, and I was definitely one of the kids that watched Free Willy and got the wrong idea and was like, I mean, it's cool the whale gets to go back, but like I watch it for getting to hang out with them and
Yeah.
like play the harmonica with the killer whale.
Yeah.
So I had all these visions of like, from a very, very young age, I'm talking like 3 or 4. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna live in the Pacific Northwest. or even somewhere up north by the ocean. I'm gonna have a cool house with big windows that overlooks the ocean, and have all these cool whale memorabilia things. And my best friend's gonna be a killer whale. um, and that was it for a very long time. But also, like, I grew up watching Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin and Austin Stevens and Mark O'Shea on TV. And I liked the idea of them, like, with all of them, like, it was very clear passion was the big main driver. And it was a desire to share passion, which was something that also appealed to me. And at some point, the orca thing didn't seem as good of an idea. Um, so we didn't do that. And around the same time, I had started getting really interested in turtles, just because there was turtles around. Like, I was seeing turtles. I've never, to be totally honest, and again, not disrespecting anybody who really likes them, sea turtles just don't really do it for me. I don't know why. Yeah. I think they're super neat. Like, I got to touch one in the Bahamas once. It's very cool that there's, like, it's a marine reptile.
Yeah.
That gets so large. We have leatherbacks here in Maine that, like, I still haven't gotten to see one, but that's a turtle the size of, like, a Volkswagen.
Sick.
Like, I would really love to see that. That doesn't mind being in 50-degree water. Like, it feels weird to call them turtles. They're kind of their own thing, and I think they're neat. But it was always freshwater turtles that really got me. In addition to just things like snakes, and I've always loved, like, anacondas, or anything that, like, anything really that, not even just reptiles, also mammals and birds, anything that really lived along that water land interface, that whether it be intertidal or something that lives by the edge of a creek or a lake, like, that was, I don't know. I really liked it. It was probably because that was the kind of stuff that I was catching. But yeah. And that slowly, just whether consciously or subconsciously, I made the quick jump from getting in a wetsuit and getting thrown around by an orca to, I meant, like, like the jumping stuff. They call it water work, where they'd, like, get on their nose and get tossed up 30 feet in the air.
Oh yeah.
And stuff. I went from, like, that's going to be Colin, like, 100%, that's going to be me, to, like, like, mata-matas are cool, like, let's try that out.
Mata-matas are in fact cool. Yeah.
They're righteous,
very, very
and
cool.
just like,
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to work in some capacity, with wild animals, specifically mostly aquatic or semi-aquatic wild animals, in a way that I could share them with others. That was very important to me. Not just necessarily because I like them, but really because, like, I feel like, or I've always strongly felt that if people, the closer they get to know a species, the more they're going to like it. I feel like a lot of people don't like snakes and reptiles just because they don't know them. They've never met one.
Yeah.
It's human nature.
Oh my God. I don't mean to interrupt you at all, Colin, but you're so dead on, man. I just had a conversation. Hopefully one day he'll hear this. One of my students up at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy, I was getting ready to leave a training session to go to my shop to take care of stuff. And this one student says something about Komodo dragons. I don't know what he said, but the other guy one of my coworkers, geez, yeah, I don't know why that word was escaping me for a minute, but coworkers turned to this student and says, "Oh, you should ask Professor Phil what he's about to go do." And he was like, "What are you about to go do?" I'm like, "I'm about to go care for about 100 lizards and some tortoises." And he goes, "Yeah, well, I think reptiles are heinous." Like, heinous animals. And I told him,
That's
I
not
said,
an adjective you hear too much anymore.
yeah, heinous was really telling. And I said, a lot of times hatred comes from fear or incomplete knowledge. So maybe you should just come hang out and see him, and I just felt like I just hit it out of the park. I was like, that loser.
He teed you up.
He's really nice. I'm not trying to
totally
give him a hard time, but I was anyway. Yeah, I love that idea of, like, sharing that with other people. That was, yeah.
And it was sharing specifically things like you mentioned that people thought were heinous, like I always, like I specifically remember, like I'd mentioned before we hit record, my first encounter with a wild garter snake was my aunt screaming,
Yeah.
and going to rescue the ladies at the women's room at the state park from the horrible serpent that
Yeah.
had crawled out of the shower,
Mhm.
and it's a thamnophis, it's a little eastern garter snake. They're about as muppety and cute as colubrids get,
Mhm.
um, and it's just, for me, that moment was me like discovering it was like I had unlocked something inside of me, like I saw a
Yeah.
snake and I was like, okay, this is neat,
Yeah.
like I caught a snake and I was like, all right, this is cool, like I had seen snakes before in like my grandma's garden, and but I never like interacted with one.
Yeah.
And for some people that interaction was a very negative experience, and for others like
Mhm.
myself it was really positive.
Yeah.
um yeah, you know
Have you or thought any or at all? I'm sure you have. I feel like I'm trying to say this in a very kind way because it's not negative. Jesus Christ. I did not have enough coffee this morning, apparently. I'm feeling a little bit out of it. But what I was trying to say was that um have you thought more about you mentioned that point, that sort of that interstitial zone between water and land. Have you thought about what it, I know you said it was related to, probably that's what you were catching at the time, but is there anything else? Is there any other kind of um like conceptualization around why that particular zone really interests you? Or is it, have you just chalked it up to, I just caught a lot of it, it's great fun, and that's enough for you? I didn't know if you thought any more about that particular topic.
I've thought about it a little bit, and I'm thinking about it more now that you mention it. And I think that definitely exposure has a ton to do with it. Um, Both, like I said, it was what I was experiencing when I was out exploring in the wilderness, if you could call it that, of suburban New Hampshire, um, or when my family would go on vacation. Um, but I think a lot of it also is maybe greed to an
Mm.
extent. It's my way of shoehorning in both land and water, and
Mhm.
I can justify, like, oh well, orb weaver spiders commonly build their webs above creeks, they never touch the damn creek. um but to have a creek without a spider might be an incomplete picture. It's just me, I think it's just me justifying being able to get more than just fish. I love fish, trust me, like it's always been fish for Colin, but
Mhm.
um there's other stuff too. But
Yeah.
it's a lot of, I think it goes back to that diversity thing of just like that habitat kind of lends itself to, or those habitats rather lend themselves to a really ridiculous amount of biodiversity
Sure.
around the world
Yeah.
lives in that interface.
Yeah, no kidding. That's great. Very
Also, like my first like jobs were often like pet shop stuff. Like I would get stuck. My first job with animals was cleaning hamster cages at a pet shop, which was not at all what I liked doing. I knew it right off the bat because they were constantly telling me to get out of the fish section. Uh, but the part of the fish section that was closest to where I was like the ribbon snakes and the
yeah.
fiddler crabs and the red-eared sliders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So those were the first ones I got my hands on, and then my first professional, I call it my first professional thing, was volunteering at the New England Aquarium in Boston.
Mhm.
And like my first day, I'm 18 years old. I'm still in high school. I'm just like I'm a kid. I am a child.
Yeah.
And my mentor, Scott Dowd, he's an incredible dude. I don't even think he looked up from his computer when he asked me. He's like, "Hey, how do you feel about snakes?" And I was like, "I think snakes are cool." And he goes, "Okay, cool. You're gonna feed the snakes today." And the
Oh.
snakes were four green anaconda,
Whoa.
um,
Yes.
like in a communal enclosure.
Oh
Like it
shit.
was
Wow.
a big walk-in enclosure, with 4 snakes ranging from, at the time, the smallest was about 5 feet and the biggest was about 14 and a half feet.
Right.
And just like with a bucket of guinea pigs
Huh.
and like, like the Gentle Giant tongs by Midwest.
Oh
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we would use to feed them. That was our feeding tongs for them. And that was it, like it was, I was sitting for 2 hours with these really picky eater snakes, that you just had to present the food just right or they wouldn't eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was hooked, as soon as I saw that was a real thing that people really do.
Yeah.
That was all I was ever gonna do, you know. I didn't want to accept anything else.
Sure. That's cool. It's weird how you get some of these like really, really especially memorable moments in your past with regard to a specific field or
Yeah,
pursuit. Like I can think of, catching, as we were mentioning kind of before recording, when I was a little kid, I can remember catching salamanders and garden in my backyard in Connecticut when I was really, really young. I remember making some friends here in Colorado not long after we moved here and going over to a friend's house, and he had a in my memory, it was a larger tank, but I bet at the time it was probably like a 20-gallon long tank where that he had planted with mostly pothos, and he had anoles running around inside the enclosure, and
oh,
he said that the anoles would breed and lay their eggs, and occasionally babies would hatch, but usually they just get eaten. And I just remember being like totally captivated. I'm like, wait a minute, you can do this in a box in your house? What
yeah,
is
Mm-hmm.
happening? Little moments like that, or a friend that I met in high school, or I mean middle school actually, was my friend Kyle Mena, and uh, he was keeping and breeding bearded dragons at the time. And I remember going over to his place and seeing all the bearded dragons that he had, and he goes, "Oh yeah, those ones," which is, he points to the cage with a few adults in it. He goes, "Yeah, those are the adults." And then he points over here, and he's like, "And those are their babies." And I was like, Hold on, let me stop you. Let me bring you back. Those things made those things. How did that happen? And why did they not die? Tell me more. And then
yeah.
oh, they lay eggs and we incubate the eggs and they hatch. And I was like, okay, there's nothing else I ever need to do. I just need to do this. There was really something about that weird realization, that moment that like, oh, I can do this inside at home. I can watch all this unfold. That I don't know what that was, but there's something about that really just grabbed hold
Yeah,
and doesn't want to let go of for some reason. I don't know what it is.
I
Anyway.
think it's cool that you got to like, you kind of got to go from almost 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm.
Like it sounds like it was like, my whole life, like I was very lucky that my parents, like, my dad especially was very indulgent in my brother and I's interests. My brother was a big hockey kid. So my dad was always the one, like, and my mom, of course, trucking him off to practice and stuff like that. And like hockey is just kind of a time consuming lifestyle. So my
Sure.
parents
Mm-hmm.
always, whenever we would be out of town visiting somewhere else, like we were at least going to like the fish shop,
Yeah.
or like the local reptile shop, if not going to like the local museum or zoo. So I
Mm-hmm.
like, I had a pretty good feeling up until that like 18-year-old moment of like, yeah, like this, I'm pretty sure, but I never like jumped in,
Yeah.
just like
Mm-hmm.
pet shop stuff, which I didn't feel like it was the same, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Pet
It's very
shop.
similar, very, very
Yeah.
similar in a lot of ways, but very different too.
Yeah. Yeah. How
Yeah.
many how many years did you spend in the pet shops?
Off and on, almost my whole career. I got my first job when I was 14.
Okay.
I was getting paid under the table to clean those hamster cages at,
Yeah.
I think the statute of limitations is up. I don't even know if the store is still open. It was at Family Pet in Nashua, New Hampshire,
Yeah.
which is where I had like bought, um, my pet bird, and I got a lot of fish from there and stuff like that. And I just had like a rapport with the staff. And when there was an opening there, I applied, and I was like, I'm gonna turn 15 in a couple months and it's all gonna be fine. But I started there, and then yeah, I mean, I worked there all through high school, and then I went to college for a couple of years. And then I left college, And that during that year, I worked at 2 different shops at the same time. I worked at a aquarium specialty shop and a reptile specialty shop. And I was doing like 25, 30 hours a week at each of them.
Oof.
Just like I kind of resigned myself to, all right, well, if I'm not going to finish college, I'm not going to work at a real museum, you know? And that's just how I viewed it. So I was like, I'll work at a specialty shop, not just like a mom and pop pet shop that happens to have reptiles and fish.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm going to commute a little bit to go to like a specialty store. And I did that for a year. And then towards the end of that year, like I mentioned, I think before we were recording, I worked at a Petco very briefly, just enough to save up enough money to go back to school. I wanted to move across the country to go to, excuse me, the Oregon Coast Community College Aquarium Science Program,
Nice.
which is where I did get my degree from. But I had to save up money first, so I worked my ass off at Petco for a summer, and that like really solidified in my head to me like, don't go back to this. Like you don't like it here. Then I graduated school and I ended up going back to it, and I worked. I didn't go right back into working at a pet shop. I did home aquarium services or business aquarium servicing. So like I was the guy that came to clean the fish tank at the doctor's office or something like that. But I was working through a pet shop here in Maine, and I did that for a couple of years. And eventually they got rid of the service division of the store. So I ended up just kind of working on the floor. And I wasn't a big fan of that. So I ended up working with the store's pets. And I was never really assigned it. I just kind of took it over as like, no, I'm going to take care of all the store pets. And we had like a boa and some small sharks and a big red tail catfish and all sorts of stuff. And just whatever stupid crap my boss would come home from the reptile expo with, you know, like he'd just show up and just show up with a box and he's like, guess what's in here? And we're like, I don't know. Sometimes like one time it was a peach throat monitor, one time it was an arapaima, you know, like it was some real like where do you get this stuff, you know? Stuff that probably doesn't belong in a store. And I was just again kind of resigned to like, well, I think this is what I'm gonna do, you know. And then the pandemic hit, and I got laid off. And no disrespect to people who do work at pet shops, but like I kind of felt like the bag had been pulled off my head. Where I was like, oh, you know, like it was a move that I'm not sure I would have made it on my own. I think I would have just stuck it out at pet shops until I was miserable. I'm not very good at making big moves like that, you know. It's a personal trait that you know it's tough to rip the band-aid off. And so I didn't do anything for a while during the pandemic, you know. I had just moved to Maine. I just moved into my own 1-bedroom apartment, and suddenly I didn't have a job, and that was okay for that year, you know. Like I didn't have a particularly expensive lifestyle or anything like that, so like it was a pretty cool year of when it was warm enough doing some field herping or tide pooling and stuff like that, and kind of getting to know my state. And then I heard that the local children's museum was expanding and moving to a new facility, and that there was an aquarium that was going to be a part of it. And I ended up getting hired as a species consultant initially. So they already had a plan. They had been planning it out for a long time, years and years before I got involved. And I was basically brought on by a former colleague of mine who was going to be doing all the habitat work. Like he was going to build all artificial rocks and logs and stuff. And I saw he was in town, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing around here, man?" And he said he was working at the Children's Museum. And he immediately was like, "Do you know anything about the animals around here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to toot my own horn, but I know a bit, you know, and I can definitely learn more." And he was like, "Cool," because this is not any discredit to my employers, of course, but this was definitely what he said. He's like, "Because they don't. was his implication. And I was handed a species list and a rough blueprint of the gallery, with like the sizes of the tanks and where the tanks were going to be and what shape the tanks were going to be, and what was planned on going in, like they were planning on putting in all the tanks. And there was some stuff that was just not going to work. Like I'm a big dreamer, like I love like shooting for the stars. But there was plans for a sturgeon touch tank, that the dimensions of it is actually one of the turtle tanks that I sent you a picture of. It's at its longest, widest point, it is about 7 feet long, which is about the length of an adult sturgeon, you know. And when I asked them, like, okay, what are you going to do when they grow up, if you guys are going to get juveniles? And they kind of like made this motion as if to say, like, throw it back. And I was like, that's noble, and I can see why somebody would think that, for sure. But that's not how things work, like it's legally, that's not going to fly. And for a lot of different reasons, it's just not going to happen. So I wrote them a new species list, and I don't know if it was just honesty or like whatever it was, but I ended up getting hired as an aquarium consultant. So now I'm consulting on the aquarium that they're building and telling them, like, I don't think this is going to work. Maybe change this to this. There was 2 freshwater touch tanks were a part of it. One of which was going to be for the baby sturgeon. One of which was going to be for, it just said other stuff. And I was like, what were you guys thinking for other stuff? And they were like, like freshwater mussels and like crayfish. And I was like, well, like that might be a liability thing with the crayfish pinching kids, like it's going to be a maybe touch tank. And there absolutely are crayfish touch tanks at places in the United States. But like I didn't see that being super, like, this is a children's museum. Our average visitor is 5 years old, and they get nervous. And I don't want a kid having an exhibit that feels like a test that they're going to fail,
Yeah, totally.
And all on the note of the freshwater mussels, we do have freshwater mussels in Maine, but most of them are endangered or threatened. So it would not be super easy to get a permit to collect them if the person signing the permit was aware of where they were going to end up was a touch pool. Like touch pools kind of carry a certain connotation of not a good home for the animals. Something that I've said a lot is that I'm pretty sure every aquarium out there has a touch pool. And I'm not sure that there is any aquarium out there that likes their touch pool. I think it's just kind of seen as a necessity. Like I think we mentioned before we recorded, we're very careful with the one touch pool that we do have to make sure that animal welfare is first and foremost. It's only open for an hour and a half a day, and it's constantly staffed. But I ended up just kind of, we turned the sturgeon touch tank, it was going to be an insect exhibit, and then the mussel touch tank was going to be a frog exhibit. And now 2 years in, neither of those are those things. But just, I worked as a contractor doing various things for them, like helping plan, and even as far as like helping, like once the tanks were up and in the building, the guy that was being paid to like do all the life support work, like install the filtration and literally plumb everything, he needed a hand, so I started working for him. And I wanted to keep my face in front of the museum staff as much as possible and make myself seem like attached to the aquarium part of it as much as I could. So when it came time to them having to hire somebody to take care of it, they would have somebody already in mind. And eventually it didn't go quite down like that, but eventually they did hire me as their full-time aquarist. And then soon after, we hired a second aquarist, who I think is almost full-time. I'm just now realizing I don't know her full hours, but that's okay. She's great. And now we have a full live exhibits team. that kind of developed over the past 2 years as the museum has developed.
Wow.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what are some of the kind of species? I mean, you've spoken to, sharks and turtles
Yep.
and frogs and insects, but more specifically, what are the species that you're working with at the museum, and kind of how are they set up?
Yeah, I actually have our species list right here on my computer. So we have 7 tanks right now. We have 5 freshwater tanks and 2 saltwater tanks, one of which is the touch pool. And the touch pool has a divider down the middle of it, so we can separate. The truth is, it's to keep the sea stars off the sharks, to keep them from bothering the sharks. But it's also just like we made a whole thing out of it where it's mostly rocky on one side and mostly sandy on the other side. And it's my way of turning one physical plastic blocks of water into 2 different habitats.
Yeah.
So I can show kids like sand flats and rocky tide pools,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the purpose of the aquarium itself is, it's called Mountains to the Sea, and it's a watershed exhibit. It's to talk about the water cycle, using the
cool.
animals kind of as mascots for it, for lack of a better term. Ambassadors is what we prefer to use. Just like there are watershed representatives,
Yeah.
and the whole idea is to teach kids that these are the animals that they obviously associate with the watershed, but it's to teach them that us humans are just as much a part of the watershed as any of those animals are.
Mhm.
And so like while they're getting to meet like a cool frog or watch a painted turtle or something like that, they're learning about the water cycle and learning about how they can better be a good neighbor to all these things. So right now we have like brook trout. I have a big school of brook trout, which are really fun. They eat a lot, and dads specifically, it seems, can't resist trying to touch them, like reaching into the tank and feeling around. Yeah, which is a whole thing. They're gonna get a lid soon, so to prevent that. But right now it's just a bit of a source of anxiety for me. We also have what is it right now? We have 5 species of turtle. We have an eastern painted turtle. We have a musk turtle, which was our first one, a common musk turtle, who actually has hypomelanism.
Ooh.
She was wild caught with it, and that's what got her in trouble. All of our turtles are rescues from the pet trade, actually. So the painted turtle is the only one out of the 5 species that we have, 4 species that we have, that is legal to keep as a pet in Maine. Maine has extremely restrictive laws on reptiles, amphibians, and fishes specifically, as well as invertebrates. Like most states will have like a blacklist of what you're not allowed to have, where Maine does the opposite, and we have a white list of what you are allowed to have. And if you try to make a list of life, it's going to be, you're going to leave stuff out. So there's things that are on the list that are very surprising, and there's things that are on the list or are not on the list that are very surprising, like spilotes. Totally cool.
Whoa.
For some reason, the whole genus, and like when you see it, there's like maybe, I would say, less than 20 genuses of snake that are okay in the state, and they were like, tiger rats, let's do them.
Those are cool.
Yeah, it literally, the list reads off like somebody from Fish and Wildlife like went into a pet shop and just listed what they had in stock at that time, because like red tail catfish, totally legal, you can get it. Electric eel, no problem, get it. Freshwater shrimp, no.
No
koi,
shrimp.
no koi.
You can't have koi in Maine.
Get it?
Koi are like kick your door down illegal in Maine.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
Why?
So I know the reason for the koi, or at least I've been told the reason for the koi, is that it all comes down to invasive species. They're worried about invasive species here in Maine. that's kind of the whole thing, is our natural resources, it's that whole LL Bean catalog,
Yeah.
vacation land lifestyle. That's what tourism is, the biggest driver of the economy in our state. And the biggest driver of tourism is our natural resources and the species that live there. So in the case of koi, a lot of koi domestically carry what is called koi herpes virus, which is a herpes virus, and it's very contagious to specific fish, including Atlantic salmon. Maine, just, I don't know, 45 minutes from here is Lake Sebago, which has I think, last natural population. I'm not sure it's totally natural now. I think it's probably stocked to an extent, of landlocked Atlantic salmon. So like Sebago Salar, or sorry, Salmo Salar is the Atlantic salmon. And we have our own subspecies here, Salmo Salar Sebago, which is named after the lake. And they're specifically worried about the landlocked salmon getting koi herpes virus.
Wow. Okay.
And like other stuff, like you can't get red-eared sliders here, which I am pretty inclined to agree with. Because totally. I see red-eared sliders out in the wilderness of Maine regardless, and they're not native to here. That's for sure. Trying to think, there's other stuff here. You can get an emu.
What?
Which is cool. But like, if you've never heard of, say, like celestial pearl Danio, which is a very popular little fish, if you've ever seen them. They're just a cute little micro Danio from Southeast Asia. They were over harvested initially, I think, or something like that. They're not doing super hot in the wild, but they breed like little bunny rabbits in captivity. So, and they're really pretty. A lot of people say they look like a little brook trout. They have little spots and red fins, and they kind of have that dark greenish body color. Not legal here in Maine, as best as we could tell when we worked at the shop, or when I worked at the shop, because we never could carry stuff like that. It was because they were discovered and described after the list had been made. Which was a while ago. Uramastes are on the list. You can get Uramastes in Maine. I'm not sure you can get the whole genus.
Okay.
Because it's weird how, like, you can tell different people did different parts of the list, because with reptiles specifically, it tends to be by genus. Like, you can get the whole genus except for like this particular species that's more cold hardy or something. But with fishes, it's very much like binomial name by species.
Oh, wow.
So like, there's some severums of the genus Heros that you can have and some that you can't, when ecologically speaking, they're all the same. Like, they have different phenotypes and different home ranges. Maybe some different specifics in how they breed, but as far as like invasive potential or anything like that, I would assume that they're all about the same.
These are cool. I don't know much, if anything, about fish. So I just looked up these celestial pearl Danios. They're really cool.
Yeah, they're cute, right?
Yeah, you're right. They do look just like a brook trout. They look so similar.
And they're perfect for the person who wants to have like a little desktop aquarium. Like, they get an inch long.
Yeah.
Like an inch is a big one, so you get a 10-gallon tank, you could keep half a dozen of them really, really comfortably.
Wow.
Cool.
But and like, that's not to say I'm not trying to rag on Maine or anything like that. I appreciate how much they are. And I know that they are working on the list, in the sense that like they are planning on adding things eventually.
Oh, they are?
Yeah. But like, their priority is just not the hobby, and like, not necessarily it should be, like, they're more worried about like how ticks are really doing a number on the moose around here, or like dudes poaching salmon or sturgeon when they shouldn't be, or like normal fish and wildlife stuff. They're not worried about what Joe Schmo has in his tank, for the most part. And that's the thing, is like, a lot of the law is not necessarily enforced, on like a store level, like retail level, more so. But like, if you have a mystery snail in your kid's beta tank, you know, like they're probably not going to knock on your door, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
come pick the snail up, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I totally lost track of where I
Wild.
was, but
No, it's
No, we
fast.
were just talking about the kind of the species that are
oh
that you
gosh,
have at the
yeah,
museum there. But that was, I mean, I really enjoyed that
yeah.
tangent.
What another thing that in that kind of in regards to how strict Maine is, for the most part, as far as obtaining species for the museum, I can't import them from out of state. I have to collect them
Mm,
myself or purchase them in state, which is kind of cool, but also kind of a lot. Um,
yeah.
the proposed species list for my gallery, like what I'm hoping to end up with between freshwater animals, marine animals, and ambassador animals. We count those as three different things. With ambassadors being animals that don't live on permanent display for the most part, but come out for programming.
Mhm.
We're looking at 125 species,
Oh wow.
Wow.
which that's a lot of tromping around in creeks with a dip net.
Yeah.
And as like I mentioned before, like the species that you're looking for is always the one you can't find.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been a whole thing. As far as herps go, we are planning on. I think we're good as far as species of turtles go. I don't really. We have three species, or sorry, four species, as I was trying to say earlier. We have an eastern
Mhm.
painted turtle. We have a male. His name is Henry, and he is the man. He's just a super great exhibit animal. He's very outgoing. He's always visible, and kids love him. We have the musk turtle, Morty, who she came to us as an illegal pet through a
Mhm.
rescue situation. She was surrendered. Up here in Maine, we're on the northern edge of the common musk turtles range.
Mhm.
So they are in Maine. They're not considered threatened or endangered, but they're considered a species of special concern, which means like you can get in trouble for having that, despite the fact that like arguably they do make pretty good pets, um, especially as far as freshwater turtles go. Um, so we have those two, and those are our two exhibit turtles right now.
Mhm.
We have an elderly pair of eastern box turtle. The male is in his 70s and the female is in her 40s.
Wow.
And they live behind the scenes because they're old. We don't want kids yelling at them all the time. Um, not that they would, but like we just want them in a more quiet environment. And we have a spotted turtle that we just got last month, and she's in quarantine right now. But the plan is to see if she gets along with the musk turtle eventually. We initially had the musk turtle and the painted turtle together, but the painted turtle is a male, and was just like relentlessly trying to mate with the poor musk turtle,
Yeah.
to the point where like they were locking on to each other's necks at times, like physical. Um, I don't want to say fights, but like it was getting down. You know, like there was. I was called in on a day off once to break them up. And like I don't know how much you guys know about musk turtles though, but they got pretty big heads for their
Yeah.
size,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
they feed mostly on gastropods
Yeah.
Yeah.
in the wild. So like that's quite the
And
bite.
clamp.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
were a little bit worried that like if Morty decided to like get pushy with Henry, if she really got bothered, she was just going to take a hand off of him
Yeah.
or
Sure.
something,
Yeah.
you know. So
Totally.
we did separate them. Um, and that I got to have a fun meeting with like the museum directors about how it's not a bad thing if we have turtles in more than one tank.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
could have a turtle in every tank, and that would still be pretty cool, you
Yeah.
know. And I made like the chicken in every pot joke where I was like, we're gonna have a turtle in every tank
Yeah.
as far
Yeah.
as freshwater goes, but we're not gonna do that. But yeah, we're planning on keeping just those four species of turtle. Um, we only have single individuals of three of them, like I mentioned, and I wouldn't mind getting them um, members of their own species to interact with if
Mhm.
they decide to. Turtles aren't particularly social. I would argue that painted turtles are a little bit social. They definitely seem to like, at least ours definitely seems to get something out of interacting with people or the other animals in his tank. Um, and just like I see it more as I want the animals in my care to be able to be what they are. you know.
Yeah.
I want them to live as full a life as possible, and reproduction is a part of that. So even if it's the turtles are mating and producing eggs and I'm not incubating those eggs because the state doesn't want me to do that, or the institution doesn't have a place to place babies or anything like that, I'm still going to let them do their part,
Yeah.
you know,
Sure.
just because it's something that they should be allowed to do in my mind.
Right.
We're also planning eventually on 3 or 4 species of snake.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
I'm talking with the state right now. We're going to start with garter snakes, which is
Nice.
very cool for me to be like kind of getting back to that.
Yeah.
And in addition, I wanted to get a water snake, a northern water snake, Neordia, um, as an ambassador animal, and a milk snake as an ambassador animal, because we do have milk snakes here in Maine.
Wow.
And they're just like, people love snakes, and some people don't love snakes,
Yeah.
as we were mentioning, you know. So like I really wanted those as animals that people could interact with, and not just be like a snake in a box or a snake through a window, which I
Right.
think is good and I think is important, but I don't think it has the same effect as a snake that you can touch, you know, in
Right.
a guided situation.
Yeah.
And additionally, I really want to try smooth green snakes at
Mm.
some point. I just think they're so gorgeous. You know,
Yeah.
they're
They're
a very
beautiful.
snaky looking snake. You know, they got big
Oh yeah.
eyes and the yellowish chin and the bright green bodies. And I remember seeing them in pet shops as a kid for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were always like, it was like the tank of green tree frogs, the tank of green anoles, and the tank of green
Yep.
rough green snakes or smooth green snakes. And like around Christmas time, you could get 29-gallon tank that had
Yeah.
a couple of each, you know, and you could get your little
Yeah.
community set up.
Sure.
And I didn't know back then that apparently they're not easy to care for at all.
Yeah.
And a lot of people struggle with the genus, to put it very lightly.
Really?
So if anybody listening has any idea how to not kill these things, I would love to chat, because I would love to keep them at some point, but I don't want to go out and collect any unless I know they're going to thrive. You
Yeah.
All
know,
right. So the Ophiodris people out there, reach out. Reach
yeah,
out to Colin.
please,
You just
please,
knew,
smooths, not roughs. We don't
wait,
have roughs this
Yes.
far north.
you just knew Ophiodris. You just knew that off the top of your heads about the unreal, you know? Like I just unbelievable. Every time we do
Man.
these shows, I'm always like, man, my Latin and general. Or earlier when you guys were talking about the river that is sort of like the border of the Guyana Shield, I'm like, I don't even know what a shield is. I need to go to school. I mean, you guys,
Dude, I don't have a firm grasp of what a watershed is,
yeah, no, neither
and
do I.
I run an exhibit about them, so like, it's okay.
Oh,
You know, like, I don't know what a shield is. I was Googling scientific names to brush up on them before this. I'm
yeah,
pretty good at them. I don't like to toot my own horn, but I am fairly good with scientific names at this point.
yeah.
Once you read enough of them, it's very much like you start seeing the same parts of the word, and you're like, oh, okay, I've seen that before. You
Yeah,
know,
sure.
and I
What is?
love dinosaurs too.
Oh
So
yeah,
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 that
dinosaurs
helps.
help with that a
yeah.
lot.
They definitely help
I
with
have
that.
a pretty like photographic memory, so I tend to remember things like scientific names. Like I can see them in my head, but I always put
Yeah,
the emphasis on the wrong syllable when I'm
yeah,
pronouncing them. So
yeah.
that's the thing is I don't speak Latin, so I don't know how to pronounce these things correctly, but I give
I
it my
don't
best
either.
shot.
I got a good story about that actually. When I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
in
let's hear
school,
it.
there's like the textbook on marine aquariums. I think it's the Marine Aquarium Handbook. Look at that. I'm like saying like the textbook, the established book, and I can't remember the title of it exactly. But the
Mhm.
authors are Julian Sprung and Charles Delvick. And Charles Delvick, like the guy who wrote the book on coral, came to my school to like guest lecture and talk with us and stuff when I was in college.
Ooh,
And like he was very cool, you know, he was very down to earth, and we got to meet him, and like we were going out to drink with him after class and stuff like that. Like, dude's the man. At
Yeah,
the time he was working for the California Academy of Sciences. I don't know if he's still there.
nice.
Like we're Facebook friends, but it's not like we talk or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in the hobby and just, I mean, I guess on planet Earth, there is a genus of coral that's very well known that like I had grown up calling Acropora. Like
Okay.
it's Acropora. They're like the branchy ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking about coral, and Charlie Delby like says Acropora.
Oh
And
man.
like me and all my classmates are looking at each other like, do we correct him? And we're like, no, like he wrote the book, you know, like he didn't name the genus, but like he should know. He should know. And I think what it really comes down to is just like say it with conviction and say it
Yeah.
like you know what you're talking about, and you got it. It's
I mean,
fun.
it does tend to be that way. I'm always arguing with some of my friends, especially my European friends. They always try to tell me it's Tomasi, Euromastix Tomasi, and I'm like, no, it's Tomasi. It's Euromastix Tomasi.
It's tomato.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
no one pronounces it tomato who in is correct. Never. It's never tomato.
That's true. I was just going to bring that up.
It's always tomato. I'm just being a smartass. I'm just kidding.
You're right though. You're not wrong.
I know it's true. It's no one ever calls it a potato. It's always
not in my life. If somebody was like, "Do you want a potato?" I'd be like, "No,
What's
I don't know
potato?
what that is. I don't want that."
Yeah. Maybe it's potato in another language, but it's definitely not potato in English. You know what I mean? Or wait, no, I said that wrong. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, we're getting into semantics here.
We got the gist of it.
Yeah.
Do you guys mind if we take a quick bathroom break really
Oh,
quick?
of course.
Yeah,
Sure.
go for it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just 1 second.
Yeah,
Be
no
right back.
problem. Take your time. I might take a bathroom break too.
Go for it.
I do, in fact, have to.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'll read some poetry to our listeners here.
Oh, you should. You should read some poetry. Do you want to read? What do you want me to snap my fingers for you, so we can do some slam poetry? Is that what? Not that kind of poetry.
Poetry that I do. Jeez, dude.
I didn't know you might be doing some slam poetry. That'd be kind of cool.
No, I don't.
I used to go
way outside my wheelhouse.
Oh yeah, same. I used to go to this place called the Mercury Cafe here in Denver, and it's like this like bar / cafe / hangout joint, and they have like you can learn like blues and swing dancing on the roof a couple times a week, and then they have slam poetry like a few times a week as well. And there was one guy who used to go up every time I went there. He was the same dude. He'd go up and do the same stuff. He'd go up and just get up on the mic and he'd go, "This ain't no Starbucks, motherfucker. This ain't no fucking Starbucks, motherfucker." And he would just start out everything he was doing with how it's not a Starbucks. It was hilarious. It was a very strange.
Everybody's got to have their thing, right?
Yeah, he really had his thing, that's for sure. And his was this ain't no fucking Starbucks, motherfucker. That was his whole. That was right. That's where we're at, Colin. We're at Starbucks and how it's not. It doesn't matter. It was.
Phil, did you need?
It was a Starbucks here in Portland recently that you might see it on the news because they shut down after the employees went to unionize.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is like you said, I'm sorry for being so dramatic about that.
No,
they shut down. Like, oh, what did they find a rat in the coffee or something? No, it's just the man.
Don't you know, Colin? Don't you know that unions are the enemy of free market capitalism? I mean, here, I'm gonna hit the restroom too. I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's so annoying. All the union busting stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll work out in the end. But like we have people who work at the Starbucks who also work at the museum who are wondering what they're going to do for a job.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to see that. I feel like there's like kind of a renewed or resurging emphasis on kind of labor movements right now, which I'm glad to see.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing. It's needed, but it's interesting.
Always gonna support people fighting for what they deserve.
Yeah, well said. Same. So complicated. Shouldn't be though.
No, that's why I like fish and frogs and stuff. Is they make more sense to me than
Oh yeah,
other stuff.
yeah. I relate. I can totally relate to that. Can you see the? I don't know if you can see it in the background. That's some of the baby spoilies back there.
Are those the baby rack? Or is that?
Yeah, that's some of the babies. Yeah, they're all big.
I've been able to see like a little bit of movement, but not a ton.
Yeah.
Roy showing off his lame reptiles again.
Yeah, that's a baby in your hand.
Yeah, this is a baby. These are they come out of the egg like 18 inches.
Oh
Oh,
my
yeah,
goodness!
sick.
Look at that little
Wow,
puff.
that is. I mean, they're not babies anymore, right? They're how old are they now?
They've only had one shed. So they're about a month old. A month 5 weeks maybe.
That is a big baby.
Yeah. Yeah, they're big. They come out of the egg big.
Monster.
Like that is the size of an average adult garter snake, where I come
Yeah.
from. Like
Yeah,
absolutely,
totally.
Oh yeah.
that would be a good one.
They slam pinkies right out of the egg, no problem at
Right
all.
on.
They could take a fuzzy, but they're a little, they're kind of
I
squirrely.
always tend I'm a big proponent of with snakes, especially feeding smaller
Hmm.
than they necessarily can take. You know, I mentioned those anacondas that they were kind of picky eaters. One of them, uh, she was the longest one at that time, but not the heaviest. Ashley um, was a 14-foot animal that
Yeah.
when I started had not eaten for like dependably for a couple months at that point, which is not too huge a concern with a large
Yeah.
constrictor. But like you were starting to see it like in her body form and stuff. Like you could tell that like, she was getting a little skinny, and she needed to get a good meal in her. But she just wouldn't like they thaw out a 10-pound rabbit or a chicken or something like that, and she'd look at it and she'd go in the water. She just wasn't interested.
Wow.
But we also had a juvenile in the enclosure that was about 5 feet. And one day, they were the Rodent Pro medium sized guinea pigs. So like
Mm-hmm.
we're talking
Yeah.
Yeah.
a little bit bigger than a baseball,
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeding those to the little one. And Ashley was nearby, and I just like offered it, and she slugged it, just
Nice.
like
Yeah.
wailed it. So I was like, okay. And I fed her the rest of the bucket, which was like 4, which is nothing to that snake. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. So I went upstairs into the freezer and I got a whole bag, and they come in like bags of 10. And I thawed out the whole bag, and she ate 14 medium guinea pigs that day.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which is probably like the same as like a young colubrid like that eating 14 pinkies. It's a huge
Yeah.
meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went to my boss, Scott, afterwards, and I was like, hey, I got Ashley to eat. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, medium guinea pigs. And he was like, how many? And I was like, 14. And he
Whoa.
like almost fell out of his chair, because he like here's his snake that he's responsible for, and here's this high schooler that he's like agreed to let
Yeah.
help out clean the tanks for free,
Yeah.
who just fed his snake 14 guinea pigs, and he's like, that's kind of a lot,
That's
but
a
she was
lot of
fine.
that's a lot of hogs, man.
And our shipping rates from Rodent Pro went way up because we started ordering just like every order had 4 or 5 boxes of just medium guinea pigs for her. And that's all she really ate for the rest of her life was
Interesting.
very small food.
How strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just preferred it and like wouldn't eat rats, wouldn't eat quail, guinea pigs.
Yeah.
That's it.
Huh.
Nothing else.
Interesting.
That's the closest thing to a baby capybara,
Yeah, yeah.
That's what we figured. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I had heard other like large constrictor guys. I mean it's Kevin, the guy who owns Nerd and
Yeah.
operates Nerd. He is a good friend of Scott, and I've met Kevin a few times. And while I will be very quick to disagree with keeping snakes in drawers, I will admit, and like very like I don't know how else to say it, Kevin can read a snake like a book. The guy understands snakes on a level that I just will never be able to do. And I remember talking with him about picky anacondas at one point, and he said something to the effect of like, "Don't try a duck; it'll definitely eat the duck, but don't try the duck." I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "They'll never eat anything else." And I guess like that waterfowl is a pretty big part of their diet in the wild. And I'm kind of the mindset of like feed things what they want to eat, but I also understand that like, especially from his perspective, he's got a lot of anacondas. He can't feed them all ducks,
right?
From like a financial standpoint, you know.
Right. Isn't it bizarre when you meet those individuals who have like, you know, almost like a bizarre primal understanding that they've developed of like a group of reptiles or a specific animal. You know, like we were talking about this with or at least we briefly touched on this topic with Dr. Kelsey Chapman on one of our previous episodes, where she was talking about how oftentimes if she's working with someone who's something of a specialist or somebody who, you know, this is like the primary animal you work with all of these things, that she'll sort of probe a little bit deeper with the questioning and the line of questioning for some of those owners, because, you know, is this normal for you and your animal? Is this typical? Is this what you see across many different animals? And been thinking a lot about that too, because I don't know, I'm fascinated by that. It's so weird to me that we can see there's all this stuff that you can kind of be aware of that seems to kind of happen under the surface, or, you know, below your conscious awareness at a subliminal level. And it, you know, obviously, you know, it'd be pretty easy to just chalk that up to, oh, it's just experience, it's just time, right? I don't know. What do you guys make of that?
I a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah.
I think experience counts for a lot, and that in a lot of ways, a lot of this stuff is stuff that you can learn how to do. But I've also met people like Kevin and others that they just had that one species or that one group that like
they just get it for some reason.
It's something else. It's my mentor at the aquarium, Scott, likened it to Temple Grandin a lot.
Familiar with her.
And not on mistake by any means either. Through my work at the aquarium, I ended up meeting Cy Montgomery, who wrote a book called Soul of an Octopus, about giant Pacific octopuses. And it kind of kicked off the whole recent trend in like people being obsessed with octopuses, rightfully so.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And kind of seeing them again as like, this is something that's not just calamari, you know, like this is something that thinks and is something more, you know. And she was at the aquarium at the time to talk with Wilson, who was another volunteer. His name was Wilson Minash, and I'm definitely saying that wrong. I'm definitely pronouncing his last name wrong. He was retired when I met him, so he was already pretty old when I met him, like I'd say 70s. He had been a rocket engineer with NASA, I think, for a very large portion of his life. The dude was like a very brilliant engineer who had just in his retirement started volunteering at the aquarium for something to do. And he just like got octopuses like nobody else would. And they also like really liked him. Like the aquarium would get a new giant Pacific octopus, and Wilson would be the first one to meet it every time. Because like he just was really good at helping them like come out of their shell and like teaching them that like, no, people ain't bad, you know, like the people here, we ain't gonna hurt you, you know, like we're your friends. And that dude, like I mean, I saw it with my own eyes, you know, like this old man wrestling with a 70-pound octopus and just enjoying it and saying things like, "Oh, you're being a little rough today," and like scolding it, like pointing
Yeah,
at this octopus and like talking to it, being like, "Hey, be gentle."
right. It's so funny because I don't know why this is only occurring to me now, but like, we write, we read books about how to care for this stuff, and we'll read care guides and
Yeah.
seek outside help and opinion. But at the end of the day, you could do everything right, and that animal might just not like you, you know? Like it might just be like, you know what, I don't like this weird guy who's always trying
Yeah.
to throw food at my face. I'm done. I'm just gonna let it rip
It
and
happens.
just go out. That's always it's so funny to think about to me. The idea that you could do everything right.
And just sometimes it doesn't work out, you
Oh,
know.
that's great. Yeah, and it also feels a little bit justified because I'm convinced there are days when I'm thoroughly convinced that I have an animal that just hates me, just doesn't like me at all.
I certainly have.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I've got them. I have I think I have two different Egyptians in that regard. One that just hates me with a fiery passion from hell. Pork chop, pork chop. Sorry.
He's a cool
And
critter, dude.
Boulder. We're good. Boulder is she flips over. She's afraid. She's almost like, just don't deal with me. She does the whole, the Euro flip. And
Yep.
it always
Mhm.
intensifies around this time of year too, because this is usually when I drop males in the drop pork chop in the
Mhm.
cage to see if there's going to be breeding, but no breeding this year for those guys. So yeah, anyhow, little bit of a tangent there. But so
I
something
think
I'm
I just went on like a 30-minute tangent, so I think that's
I don't think so.
yeah.
I thought it was pretty solid. It wasn't tangential from my perspective. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely interested to talk more about some more of these sort of esoteric concepts, with regard to how is it that one person knows so much about weird reptiles and with your example of Kevin, but I'm very curious to to hear about the ways that your line of work or your perspective in general either meshes with or conflicts with herpetoculture sort of broadly, or it has your line of work changed the way you think about herpetoculture. I mean, I'd really just like to kind of unpack all of this if you're up for it.
Yeah. Um, to answer part of that right off the bat, it definitely has changed my impression of herpetoculture. Um, Partially because I recognize, um, I don't think that we like if you're talking about like the pet trade, herpetoculture, or like the hobby, I don't necessarily think that you're talking about three specific independent things. I do think it's kind of like a spectrum from like
Yeah.
pet shop up to
Yeah.
herpetoculturist, you
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Um, if I haven't been obvious, I think I could admit now that although I once was this person, like I've grown kind of weary of the pet shop type
Hmm.
herpetoculturist, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term, the pet shop type keeper who like, you know, as an example, the first Euromasties I ever worked with was a trade-in at Family Pet and Aquarium. They told us it was 12 years old. They'd had it for 12 years. It was a Molly.
Mm-hmm.
It was that long with the
Yeah.
tail, 12 years old. It had
Indeed.
lived in a 10-gallon tank its whole life
Ugh.
on Repticarpet, the green kind.
Ugh.
And
Mhm.
when we were like, okay, what do you feed it? And like, they gave us the whole setup, which was a water dish, the Repticarpet, half a log for it to hide in,
Yeah.
a single incandescent bulb, no UV.
Sure.
And we're like, what have you been feeding it? And they're like, it gets a dozen crickets a week.
Oh man.
And this thing, I swear to God, because like that, I was the guy taking care of it at the pet shop, not knowing any better. It slammed crickets.
Sure. The only
Like,
Mhm.
thing you had to eat.
yeah, and it
Yeah,
wouldn't eat
exactly.
anything else. Like I was offering it greens once I found out. Like I remember very specifically taking it outside
Yeah.
because the poor thing had like a centimeter thick layer of just like dead shed on its back.
Oh yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, like it looked like a gross tan color the whole time I knew it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually, like the shop sold it and told the new family exactly what they had been told. You
Oof.
know,
Mhm.
at this time, keep in mind I'm like 15, so like I don't really have a a voice in the whole situation, as far as like, well, we could really be doing better by this. Like
Mhm.
a big thing at that first pet shop job for me was I was constantly getting into fights with grown adults who were still working at a pet shop about UV lights,
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
where I was like, we need to put UV lights on these animals. And they're like, you know. And I very specifically remember one of the UV lights that we did end up carrying at the store was a Zilla brand fixture
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
had plexiglass covering up where the bulb is, like to
Yeah.
protect the bulb. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, it's gotta go. Like that kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah. It
And
does.
like
Yeah.
it for like a summer, it was me and this dude who was in his 40s with like kids. And I was like 15, and like I'd come in on the weekend. I started on Friday afternoon, and I'd unscrew the plexiglass panel off the fucking light, and I'd come in on like he'd come in on Monday and he'd screw it back on. And I
Mhm.
think he just was doing it like as a way to be like, listen up, you little whippersnapper,
Dude.
or
Mhm.
whatever it was. I'm not sure.
I
But
could
like
get
I've
into some. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
no,
just for the record, I could get into some gnarly stories about
yeah,
the time I spent at local Colorado reptile shops, as an employee, as a customer, all of the above. And
Yeah.
man, I mean, again, thankfully at most, but not all of these particular shops, either the shop is no longer around. Well, not most, but the two in particular that would be the most uh intense to sort of recount. The owners are no longer around, they've passed away, and the shop's closed down, so there's, wouldn't get
Mhm.
in
way
any
she goes.
trouble or
Yeah,
anything, but it's just like, holy shit, man, some of the stuff that went on at some of those shops is mind-blowing.
yeah. If you
Yeah,
told me that Molly was still alive, I would believe it in a second. That's the
I mean,
crazy thing.
they can be pretty resilient given specific scenarios,
Yeah,
they can be it's funny because they can be so much more resilient, but then so sensitive sometimes. It's kind of like humans, right? You
Yeah.
hear about people who fall 55 feet rock climbing when, they fall because they forgot
yeah,
to tie in and they survive. But then you
Mhm.
also hear about people falling over and hitting their head in the ground and dying. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
It's like,
totally.
what? It's really bizarre. Uh,
Nothing means anything.
Yeah.
Just go for it.
I,
Um,
Nothing means anything. That's going to be the quote for the quote
Yeah.
title of this show. Nothing means anything.
oh boy.
On Glenn
um,
Marshall, episode 25, Project
yeah.
Herpetoculture. Gonna be really good. Nothing means I mean that. I'm keeping because it's actually pretty good. Nothing means anything.
Well,
That's true.
it kind of to that regard, but maybe in a more eloquent way of saying it. When I'm talking to people about animal behavior at the museum and stuff,
Mhm.
it very often comes up like that an animal is not acting the way the book says.
Sure.
We have some little fish in one of the pools called mummy chogs.
Yeah.
If you guys have
Mhm.
ever spent any time on the East Coast, you might be familiar with little mummy chogs. They're a little killifish that comes from the estuaries around here.
Mhm.
Mummy chog is a word that means stays together, and that is a very blunt translation, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Um, and ours are not, they're often by themselves, you know.
Mm.
So like when I'm talking to a kid about like the mummy chog that's like pecking at their finger in the touch pool, I'm like, oh, mummy chog means stays together, and they're
Yeah.
they're looking at a single individual.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times I'll say like, well, the fish never read the book.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like the turtle didn't read the book. He like our painted turtle was raised as a pet in somebody's house. Um, I'm not sure how much he understands about what it is to be a painted turtle.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
totally.
sure if we dumped him back out in the wild, he'd survive. But
Mhm.
I also think he'd just probably swim up to the first people he saw and be
Yeah.
like, "Please pick me up." Like it sucks out here. Like
Yeah.
I want my pellets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Help. Help. Give me
um,
those damn pellets. I've been living on those forever.
yeah, they're great. Bug bites, uh,
Yeah.
best turtle pellets out there. Um, but yeah, I think now that I've worked um, in public positions, and this is something that I have thought a lot about. Um, my opinion of the hobby has changed a little bit, And a lot of it does come back to that, like my animals aren't just for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like the animals I care for are everybody's animals, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like, of course, that comes with the caveat of like an admission ticket. You know, I work for a place that charges admission. You have to pay to come see my animals, you know? And this is something I told myself when I was taking care of fish tanks in doctors' offices and restaurants, where I was like, no, you're still taking care of stuff that other people get to enjoy. You know, it's not
Mm-hmm.
just for you. And I don't think there's necessarily anything selfish about having animals at home. Like obviously not. I have a big fish tank and a tortoise that is, I think I can hear him, but I can't see him right now. Like it lives in my house, you know, like it,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't think there's anything selfish about having an animal at home. I just, once I got a taste of keeping animals with a purpose other
Mm-hmm.
than a self purpose, but a purpose that benefits others, I was just hooked. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of snowballed and gradually evolved into um, all my creative energy that I was putting into like planning my next tank at home, or bothering Roy on Instagram about Uranoscodon lizards and stuff like that. Because as best as I can tell, you seem to be the only guy that has a shot at having a clutch anytime soon here in the States.
Let's
Um,
go.
um,
Hopefully someday.
it all that kind of has been taken over by like, man, I'd really like to get a seahorse tank at the museum, or like,
Yeah.
you know, like now it's just like I've, like I mentioned earlier, like it's a professional indulgence.
Mhm.
You know, it's something that I was gonna do anyway,
Right.
whether I was at home or working at a pet shop or a lab, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But now I really do like the fact that I take care of animals that anybody can come see.
Mhm.
But along with that came stuff that was not super positive. Like I did work at pet shops for a long time, um, which like you go to any, even like the best pet store you've ever been to, the best reptile shop you've ever been to, and you find the dude like unprompted, like don't tell them you're coming, and you find the guy that's like 40 years old working at the pet shop. What kind of mood is he in when you come to that store? You know, like does he seem like he's really thrilled about how his life is going? You know, and I mean, I don't mean any offense, but like I know I was going to be miserable working at pet
Yeah.
stores, because it was tough. Um, I get attached to the animals I care for. It's something that I
Mm-hmm.
can't avoid,
Yeah.
and I would like the constant revolving door of animals coming in and out, and like animals that you have formed a bond with while you were caring for them and stuff like that. Sometimes it'd be an animal, especially like a big dollar animal like a chameleon or like a green tree python
Mm-hmm.
or a tortoise, that would be at the store for maybe over a year,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come in after your weekend and your boss sold it to some dipshit,
Yeah.
you know. And sometimes you never
Yeah.
see them again. Sometimes they come back and they're good. Sometimes they come back and they're like, it's the kids' parents bringing them back and being like, they went off to school. We haven't
Mm-hmm.
fed it in a couple of weeks. How's it look? You know, and they're asking us to pay them for this peach throat monitor
Right.
or something that is
Mm-hmm.
like emaciated, you know, and that just like never, I couldn't stomach that, you know, it never sat well with me. Um, and I had it in my head that like I could do it the right way. Like I could keep my own stuff the right way. And I would look to people like YouTube, as far as like those are dudes that are like looking out for their animals, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in their own ways too. You know, like it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, Roy, you have a smaller collection overall than Phil does, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but your collection, what it makes up for, or what it lacks in sheer numbers, makes up for it's a little more diverse. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like you're covering a couple different genre, which that demands
Yeah.
more of a focus. You know, like my
Mm-hmm.
collection at the museum is so varied that like I have a lot of specimens or animals that I only have one species specimen of that species,
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
but like
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do 30 painted turtles and 30 musk turtles, and like, you know, it's just not something that is I'm capable of doing and spreading myself out like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I always felt like even if I was doing it the right way, I wasn't sure like I'd look around and like I don't know of a lot of really hardcore hobbyists up here in Maine. And maybe it's just because the really hardcore ones aren't going to the pet shop. You know, that's probably it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the few that I would meet would be like snake rack dudes,
Hmm.
you know,
Mhm.
like boas are very, very popular up here in Maine. It seems
Okay.
like just like your general boa constrictors.
Mhm.
I love a boa. Like I adore boas of all sorts, especially like your classic imperators, you know,
Oh
like
yeah.
they're just
Yeah, they're amazing.
sweethearts, you know.
Great.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they're a good pet, you know, necessarily. You know, like
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely people out there who are certainly more than qualified to keep that animal. But
Yeah.
I don't think that the average person who walks into the pet shop and sees the baby at the pet shop and starts dreaming about getting it, um, you know, like how many baby boa constrictors or ball pythons for that matter go through stores every year in the
Hmm.
United States, and how many of those animals, like a ball python lives what 35, 40 years? Like
60.
how many of those animals are
Easily. Yeah.
making that, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's just I felt like I would tell people that when I was working at the shop that I felt like I worked at a meat market.
Sure.
Mhm.
And that's again, that's not a commentary on like I eat meat. I don't have any
Mhm.
disrespect for people who eat meat or who people who are vegetarian. That's cool.
Unbelievable,
Um,
Colin. Unbelievable.
yeah, I'm a people pleaser, man. I can't help myself.
Just kidding.
I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings,
No, no,
and
no feelings. It's
but
good.
I didn't feel right being a part of that.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
once I moved out of working at pet shops and into fully working in the public sector, and by that I mean like working at a place that would the animals are for education for the most part,
Mhm.
either education about their habitats or about themselves or what have you. Um, Eventually, that kind of like even from like a hobby perspective, and I think this is a conversation I had with Roy um, about Uranoscodon brown diving lizards. Um, that like it seems like the only way to get them is to get imports,
Hmm.
you know. And this is a lizard species that I was very infatuated with. I really really like them, and I was really interested in the idea of keeping them. If like Roy hasn't already like talked about them a
Mhm.
lot, like they specialize in feeding on drowned insects on the river's edge. So
Cool.
specifically dead insects,
Cool.
which to me that like gave me this little idea in my head. I was like, I could get that on floating pellets,
Oh yeah.
you know, like
Sure.
Yeah.
the turtle pellets I just mentioned, like that's an insect based protein turtle pellet
Oh sure.
Yeah.
where like I was like, that's dude, that's a knock it out of the park. But like I had to get that over that hurdle of like import them, which
Mhm.
is like, as I'm sure you guys know, like that is a different beast, you know, like that implies involvement with like I didn't know if I wanted to get involved in that whole world,
Mhm.
you know, of you got to fill the box.
Mhm.
So like I've worked with reputable places and stuff and worked through institutions where like a reputable animal dealer is sending animals to an institution like a museum where they're like, oh, and we threw a couple extra things in the box just for fun. And we're like, what are we going to do with these? You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like they end up going home with somebody for somebody's kid, you
Yeah.
know? And it never felt okay to me, I guess.
Yeah.
And as time went on and I was getting more and more involved with like definitely staying in the public sector, um, like specifically with the turtles, I came from like the shop that I worked at before I worked at the museum. It was just store policy that like people would come in and ask about turtles and we'd say no. Like we just flat out did not sell aquatic turtles.
Wow.
Because we were like, it's not that aquatic turtles actually make horrible pets. They don't make good pets by any means.
Hmm.
But the idea of a pet turtle and the reality of a pet turtle are two
Mhm.
totally different things. You know, you get some dad coming in the shop on a Friday afternoon and being like, hey, you got any little turtles? I want an easy pet for my kids. And we'd be like, you want to go to the Humane Society and get a dog or a cat. That's going to be
Yeah.
a lot easier for your family, and it's going to be a lot easier on your wallet.
Sure.
That's going to be a better situation for everybody involved. And the way I always described it was like things like dogs or cats, or even something like a beta fish, and arguably something like maybe a bearded dragon or a leopard gecko at this point. Those are domesticated species. Those are species that have evolved alongside our species for a period of time. And our lifestyles and our environments mesh up to a certain degree. Like there's a dog doesn't necessarily have to readapt to a whole new climate when it moves to your house,
Yeah.
Right.
Which like an improperly kept bearded dragon or improperly kept reptile will,
Yeah.
It's, you have to adjust your life if you want to bring a wild animal into your house. And I know it sounds kind of crazy to call something like a day gecko or a redfoot tortoise a wild animal,
No.
but it is,
No, but it
that's
is.
what
Yeah.
it is. And I felt that was just not something that I was seeing a lot around me. And then that only got, like, when I worked at the shop, we had a whole pool in the back that was just surrendered. We had a license to keep red-eared sliders and pond sliders of any species, just because the state was eager for people to take them, so people weren't dumping them in ponds. And I think at one point we had like 17 or 18 adults of various ages, things that had been like beloved pets for decades, that had just outlived their welcome. We had some that were pushing 60. We had a couple that were in their 30s.
Yeah.
We had yellow bellies and red belly or red ears. We had some that were like, I remember the yellow belly pair specifically, like they were a very nice looking pair of animals, like they were healthy.
Yeah.
Just a really textbook example of their species, but just outlived their time. And now they're in the back room of a pet shop and a cattle trough,
Yeah,
because
sure.
that's like, is that really the end of the line for that individual? And then when I came to the museum, I was told by the museum, like my bosses at the museum, the directorial staff, that we weren't sure exactly how we were going to be sourcing our turtles specifically. When I started at the museum, they also had yellow belly sliders. They had them on a permit because somebody had dropped them off, because they had bought 4 baby turtles online and dropped off these 2-year-old. I think it was 4 males. There might have been 1 female in there, but they were all about 2 years old when they came to the museum. And before I was officially hired by the museum, they had already sent them off to somewhere else because they decided, well, let's focus on native species. But then that begged the question of like, are we going to send Colin out to just go catch these animals? And if that is the case, is that something that our visitors are going to be okay with? If we're going to present these animals to visitors, how do we do it in a way that, how do I put this? Like the publicity is good, how do we keep our nose clean? And that we decided on all turtles that we would keep would be non-releasable individuals for one reason or another, which we counted captive bred, like born and bred, as a reason.
Yeah.
If we had to. So like I was, what's his name? Mark Cantos. I sent him an email and I was like, I had looked on his website, Turtle Source, and I saw that they sold Eastern painted turtles. And I like explained the situation, and he like sent me a picture of these 4 like subadult males that he had that were available. And like he did like the cool thing about like, oh, it's a museum, so I'll give you a discount and everything like that. And I remember like sending that picture to the director and being like, okay, these are our backup plan. Like if we can't figure anything else out in state, we got to figure out the importation permits for these 4. And like we'll just get some captive bred babies, and that'll be okay. And that's not what we ended up doing, because as it turns out, in Maine, there was no shortage of animals that needed to be placed. Pretty quickly, we found the musk turtle first, who had been surrendered to a local wildlife rehab place by her owners I think, as the story as it was told to me, was to avoid charges. They didn't want to get in trouble. They found out what they were doing was illegal, and they
Oh,
brought her in. And she was non-releasable because they wouldn't share where they had caught her.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't know exactly what population she was from or anything like that. She was hypomelanistic,
yeah, that's
so
right.
it was kind of surprising that she had gotten to full adult size in the wild, apparently. And also, I don't know exactly how the injury happened. It looks suspiciously like a bite to me. But this individual, she's missing her nose and she has a very severely cleft lip. She's missing a big chunk of that upper jaw.
Oh, wow.
And that is something that happened in captivity, we think. But what that means is she can't breathe without sticking her whole head out of the water and opening her mouth.
Oh, wow.
Which, like, she's already a very light colored turtle. Like,
Right. Yeah.
that's it.
Sitting
Like
duck.
3 strikes, you're out, buddy. You got to live at a zoo for the rest of your life, or the Children's Museum and Theater of Maine. So we got Morty initially, and she was our first turtle for 6 months. She was our only turtle. And we had this little fist-sized musk turtle in a 600-gallon, 6-foot diameter
Sick.
tank. And she was loving it. There was a couple sunfish in there with her and some shiners. But she wasn't eating or anything like that. She was getting along fine with tank mates. And a friend of mine from college reached out, and when we were in school together, like a decade ago, she had some baby painted turtles in her dorm that she had found. And I kept in touch. She's one of my best friends, and she still had one of them, the male. And he was 9.5 years old. And in the time since we had graduated college, she had gotten a dog and a cat and a husband, and she had bought a house. And she expressed to me that she didn't feel like little Henry was getting the attention that he used to.
Yeah.
And I was like, he probably doesn't mind. He's probably okay with that. And
Yeah.
she insisted, like, no, like, I need a better situation for him. Um, and I had a tank, and we had an open spot in our species list for Eastern painted turtle. So I didn't see any reason why not. And we brought Henry in, and the fact that he was raised as a pet is why we consider him non-releasable. We do know where he was collected exactly. And it's like the habitat is still intact. It's still perfectly good painted turtle habitat. But it's on a very popular area with tourists. And I have no doubt that
Not necessarily
dumbass
the
would
best
swim
fit.
right up to the first people he saw and
Yeah.
just be like, take me home.
Yeah.
So he lives at a public institution just to keep him from ending up as a pet again.
Yeah.
Like, which it wasn't a terrible, like, he was very well loved for the 10 years he was a
Yeah.
pet. He's got like a little bit, like he grew up in a fish tank, so he's a little smaller than a normal wild 10-year-old male painted turtle is. He had a huge growth spurt when he came to the museum,
Right.
because of good old indeterminate growth.
Yep.
He's catching up. He's probably about 5 inches long, like straight carapace length,
Yeah.
which is it's on the lower end of the size range for a male painted turtle. I would prefer he's like maybe another inch at his age, but he is who he is, and he's healthy otherwise. Um, but that wasn't super ideal for him. And then not super long after that, my boss, the director, emailed me, and she had seen something on Facebook Marketplace about some people offering up 2 box turtles as a free, easy pet for kids.
Oh, man.
Which obviously they're not.
Right.
But also, the eastern box turtle is the most endangered species of reptile in the state of Maine. So like these people, unbeknownst to them, were just like waving a big flag about like, hey, we have an endangered species at our house. And you want it? Come get it.
Yeah.
And the director emailed it to me being like, 1, is this legal? And 2, can we get these? And I was like, yeah. So I emailed the biologist at the state, and I was like, listen, I don't know if you know about this or not, but there's some people trying to get rid of some box turtles on Facebook. They very obviously don't know what they're doing is wrong. Like, do you guys want to take them, or what are the possibilities? Like, how do we do this in the sense that like the Children's Museum ends up taking these animals in? And the state was like, oh gosh, like we're not going to charge them or anything like that. They clearly don't know what they're doing is wrong. Like we all talked it all out, like the owners, the museum, and the state. As it turns out, they had the animals for a few years, but the animals had been pets for about 30 years. Um, They had been collected or purchased legally at a pet shop down south. We're not sure exactly which state, but one of the southern states where you find eastern box turtles, but not quite Florida. Sometime around 1991 is when they were purchased, and they had been living in the same enclosure with each other that whole time. And for the better part of the, like, we didn't know about diet way back when, but we knew, but for the past 10 years, they had only been fed boiled sweet potato, bananas, and earthworms.
Whoa.
Which like the earthworms are fine, and the boiled sweet potato probably isn't bad, and neither is the banana, but just that is not going to do anybody any favors. And they also had no UV light, or any light for that matter, and had been kind of this late in their time as being pets, had been started to being passed around. So when we found out about them, they were with their third owners, and they were actually living in a home pottery studio. Which I don't know how much you guys know about pottery. That's a really dry room.
Oh, sure.
So that, like, they were very dehydrated. But again, like, these people loved these animals dearly. They were sad to see them go, and they were taking care of them to the best of their ability, like as best as they knew how. When we like reached out and we were like, you can't be giving these to people as easy pets for kids, they were shocked. They had no idea why, you know. And like the female has a vitamin A deficiency, and the male pretty clearly had some metabolic bone disease at some point. His shell's a little bit not super domey. I don't know how else to describe it. He's looking a little rough.
Sure.
But now they're living at the museum. They've been here for about a year now. We are planning on separating them soon. As it turns out, the male does not leave the female alone. And I don't know how she has survived for 30 years, because it's to the point where like she won't come out of her hide if he's around, and he knows where her hide is, so he just kind of hangs out in front of her log, and she like goes to try and get a drink of water, and he's immediately on top of her. And like they live in the director's office now. That's where their enclosure is. And so like I'll get a call on the radio for like, Colin, are you available? And I'm like, yep. You want to go to channel 4, which is like the channel that the non-public channel. And she's like, Arnie's at it again. And I'm like, oh, okay. She's like, can I break them up? And I guess like she's just gotten used to pulling the male turtle off the female at this point. But all this is to say is like I had a few years of just like constant exposure in person exposure to people doing it the wrong way.
Sure.
Through, like you mentioned earlier, no fault of their own, people doing the wrong thing for the right, or the right, I can't remember exactly.
No, you're right. You can be wrong for the
wrong
right
thing for the right reasons.
Yeah, you know, all these people love their animals dearly. You know, as far as I understand, like when the musk turtle was dropped off at the wildlife rehab place, they were crying. You know, like they had her for like 12 years at that point. You know, and if you've ever met a musk turtle, like they're just delightful. And Morty is like a very charismatic little animal. You know, she's very sweet little turtle. You walk in the room and she's up at the glass, not begging for food. She just wants to stand next to you and like watch what you're doing, you know. She's a little doll. And we joke that like through the unfortunate circumstances of being a pet, both of our box turtles, as well as our painted turtle and our musk turtle, that they would not, that those circumstances make them no longer fit for a natural ecological niche. Like we can't release these animals, but like just as every species has a niche in the environment, I'm personally a believer that every individual has their own little niche. You know, like we mentioned, there's certain people who are just it seems like they're on this earth to work with octopuses or anacondas,
Yeah, sure.
And I'm of the mindset that our turtles found the niche. It wasn't going to be in the wild being a normal turtle, but they're perfect for living at a children's museum where there's
exactly
thousands of little kids running by every day. Like the painted turtle chases kids around. Like when I say all day, I mean all day. And like little kids come up to the tank and are standing there, and he does the thing where like not the full on mating dance with like the fingernails and stuff like that, but he like pulls his front limbs in and like does the shimmy. And we figured out he's asking them to like he wants them to run so he can swim and chase them. Like he's making a request, or like he'll make splashing sounds, we've noticed, if he wants us to feed him. And then we saw he was doing something else with visitors, and we were like, well, that's not how he normally asks to be fed. Like he has a very specific sound that he makes where he cups his front legs and like bloops on the surface a little bit. It makes like a popping sound. And we're like, oh, okay, big dog's hungry. Let's go get some food for Henry. But he wasn't doing that with visitors. He was doing something else, and it seems like he was looking for social interaction of some sort.
That's cool.
He seems to really like that. So like he's found his little spot.
Yeah.
The spotted turtle that we have was not a pet fully. She was kind of a pet in a little bit of a sense. She was born at a public aquarium in Maryland as an accident. They came in one morning and there was a baby spotted turtle in the tank with the adult spotted turtles.
Whoa.
So they think like her egg had probably been like laid in a planter or something like that.
Oh,
and just
wow.
like they don't think that there was like correct incubation temperatures or anything like that. So they think that there's maybe some imperfections, It was born with a really big exposed yolk sac and stuff that had to like get worked on and stuff. She seems perfectly normal to me now. But she's definitely a lot more shy than the other four, just in the sense that she was treated like a turtle her whole life and not necessarily as a house pet.
Right. Wasn't socialized in the same way.
And that, I think, seeing just the fact that like most of my exposure to, I'm not even going to call it herpetoculture or like the hobby or pet keeping. I would just say like just keeping in general was not, there wasn't a lot of really good stories happening around me. I was seeing a lot of not so swell stuff. And like, I would have to go to things like social media or, I remember, briefly during the pandemic, I worked at the local Whole Foods stocking shelves overnight, just to pay rent. That's when I first started listening to podcasts, including Animals at Home.
Hey.
And I remember seeing like, hey, puffing snakes, I've seen those on King Snake once, and like those were neat, those are kind of neat. And I listened to that episode and I remember thinking like, okay, this dude, he's doing it the right way. Like why can't there's this huge disconnect in the way that you two are keeping animals, and how a lot of people who we would consider like role models in this field are keeping animals, in how the market is portraying these animals.
Sure.
Like neither of you two would be caught dead with a Zoo Med startup kit.
No.
Because that it's shit. It's not,
totally.
It's not good for the animal, but like 90% of the baby bearded dragons that go through Petco and PetSmart go home with one of those things,
Totally.
And it's just, at the end of the day, I felt like, while I see a light at the end of the tunnel, I see hope in people like you two. I eventually I arrived at the point myself where I wanted to take a step back from the hobby and waited out until things were better, I guess. Like I don't keep anything besides the tortoise and the fish right now. During the pandemic, I was as guilty as everybody buying pandemic animals. I got really into frogs and toads for about a year and a half, where I was keeping I had some phylomedusas, I had rainbows, like smooth-sided toads, which if you guys have never had the pleasure, let me tell you, that is a really charming species. or genus. Like I really love smooth-sided toads. They are definitely something that I would go back to in the future. And the reason I had initially gotten that group is because Josh's Frogs started offering captive bred babies for the first time. Like I had seen imported smooth-sided toads before, and just they had never really done it for me. I think it was I had to see that cute tiny little baby toadlet to like be like, oh, okay, I'll buy 3. Let's give it a shot. I've had a couple horn frogs, and Suriname toads. I kept some pipa for a while,
Oh,
which I
cool.
really, again, boy, those are neat. I love pipa pipa.
They're so trippy
and easy to care for too.
Yeah.
Like very. And I had it in my head that I wanted to set up this big paludarium in my 1-bedroom apartment with Uranoscodons and Phylomedusas. And I got really into gladiator tree frogs. If you guys have ever seen these,
Yeah.
It's Hypsiboas bowens. Now I think it's a very large tree frog. Like the, I don't think I've ever seen a picture of them online that really portrayed like properly. Like when you see them in person, you're like, oh, whoa. Like I had 2 that were like the size of my hand. Like when they're doing like the tree frog, I'm gonna hide my feet and pretend I'm on the bark. Like they were big. And like when I say that these animals, like without any effort, were making like 8, 9, 10-foot leaps across the room. Yeah, like no problem. And I got really into those for a bit. But I had this idea of like I was gonna have this own little slice of the Rio Negro in my living room, you know, with like all the fish that I love. I was gonna put pipa toads in there. I was gonna have tree frogs and lizards over the top. Who knows? Maybe get a little baby mata. I remember very specifically talking to a friend once about my pipa toads, and he's like, "Hey, how you liking the pipa toads?" And I was like, "You know, they're cool, but I think it's time that I'm honest with myself and that these toads are just like some sort of like methadone version of a mata turtle for me because I couldn't afford
totally
a mata turtle." You know, like I'm looking at the price list where it's like $425 for the mata, which is just like not happening. But I could get 3 toads for less than $100. So and I got super into that. And then when I started working at the museum, and like I had mentioned earlier, like that new perspective did shift things. And when in regards to some of the frogs, like not the rainbows, those are captive bred. The horn frogs I got are captive bred. The Phylomedusas I got were farmed. They were the Peruvian babies. They were bicolor. Super cool, but kind of treading a line of the kind of stuff you want to support, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
And before I forget, I can't believe I almost forgot about this. During all that time, just before the shop shut down, my boss had gone to some reptile show down in Florida. I think it was Daytona, maybe, not sure. But she came back with a little baby caiman lizard.
Oh wow.
Because she was under the impression that like she had heard me talk about them before. I think they're one of the coolest animals ever. I've worked with them in the past. Like I adore that genus, and like I had always thought like if I ever have a house, like a big house, like maybe that would be an option for me. You know, like I could see myself converting a room for some big wet tegus. You know, and that is what I would call them around the shop was wet tegus. So I think like tegus are allowed in Maine. You can get tegus. That's okay. Which is shocking because I do know one breeder who keeps them outside here.
Wow.
Oh, crazy.
Like, all year round.
Wow.
Like he keeps them like he just covers their whole enclosures with straw, like 4 feet of straw in the wintertime.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But she brought back this little lizard that was not legal in Maine for the store as a store pet. Because she thought it was a tegu. Like she didn't realize it was a separate genus. So it shows up and I'm thrilled. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this little baby dinosaur. Like you and me are going to be buddies. And then 2 weeks later, shop closes.
Wow.
You know? And so they're like clearing house and they're like, we're going to sell the caiman lizard. And I was like, and at that point, like it wasn't eating. It was again a farmed animal from Peru. These things come in rough, and like the survivability rate of these farmed caiman lizards is not super high. From what I understand, the whole population coming from this one farm has this certain blood pathogen that they all come out of the farm with, and it's just a matter of like, you got to catch that fast. It's not going to affect all of them, but once it takes hold, that's it. You're done. And I was concerned about that animal, but not necessarily thinking it was sick. I just thought like it was having trouble adapting to its new home, you know? And when they were like, we're going to sell it, the shop's closing down, I was like, no. And I bought it on my way out. So now I have this little baby caiman lizard at my house, and it made it like a month and a half. And I got it eating and everything like that. I was literally going down to the tide pools and picking periwinkles off the rocks for it, so it could have like real snails, like real live snails. And it just took this really fast and sharp turn down, where like all of a sudden I came home one day and its color was different. It was super dark. It was breathing with its mouth open, and the next day it was showing like neurological symptoms. Like it was like it had this tick, and its like head was having a lot of equilibrium issues. And the next day, like day 3, it was dead. And that, along with like how I went from having like no frogs during the pandemic, before the pandemic, to now I have 12. I'm starting breeding groups almost, or like I have aspirations to start breeding these things. I just kind of took a step back and I looked at it all, and I was like, I didn't feel comfortable with the path I was going down, with like the lizard and the shop closing and me being so quick to jump in and getting all these new animals and stuff. I kind of felt like I was part of a problem, and I felt like it was time to hang it up for a while, not forever, but for a while. So I gave the frogs and toads away, and I gave a lot of the fish away. At the time, I think I had 3 tanks, and now I just have the one. And I kept Sam, the tortoise, because I don't really view him as a hobby at all. He's my pet. I got him when I was in the 8th grade, so like,
wow,
he's my dog. He's moved across the country with me twice. He's been to college with me twice. Like he's my boy.
Right.
He's looking at me right now, but yeah.
So
I needed to take a step back from private keeping for a while. I felt this is also like right around when Tiger King happened, which that kind of brought the idea of keeping exotic wildlife, be it a tiger or a gecko, to like a much more public eye than it had been in before, and I don't know. It all kind of combined into me feeling not great about being involved in it.
Sure.
At that time.
Well, so just so we can calibrate here. So we are a little over 2 hours now on the show, and I don't mean to be that guy, but my fiance has made dinner, and so I know I'm gonna have to wrap things up here shortly. I appreciate all of that perspective, and I think the way I'd like to try to wrap this is to say, with that perspective in mind that you outlined, the final question that we tend to ask people for the show is why herpetoculture? Like why are we doing this? Like what's the and that can be a broad or specific type of question. So with the perspective that you just outlined, does that affect your answer to the question, like why herpetoculture? Like why do we do this?
To be honest, it doesn't. No.
No.
Because like I think through all of that, my opinion of the people who in my head were doing it right never changed. Like I know the reality of the situation. Like I know that like the first captive bred Komodo dragons, despite what the books sometimes say, or it wasn't the National Zoo. You know, it was a
Oh.
dude in Germany in his basement.
Mhm.
It was a very dedicated hobbyist, and
Mhm.
that means something. You know, like, yeah, Kevin McCurley's got 1.5 million snakes in drawers in New Hampshire.
Mhm.
Um, but the dude has personally saved my animals on more than one occasion with his advice.
Mhm.
Sure.
You know,
Mhm.
like there's a place for all of us. Why herpetoculture? For me, it's what I said at the beginning, where like I don't like to be specialized in what group of animal I'm working with.
Mhm.
Um, it's a reminder of life on Earth, you know, in that I get to put myself in the same list. Like, I am an Earthling, just like
Mhm.
a giant Pacific octopus or an electric eel or a green anaconda or a Eurymastes or an Amazon puffing snake is an Earthling. I
Yeah.
get to put myself on the same list as all these things, and I think that is the craziest thing ever. I love it, you
Yeah.
know, and it's a reminder that by bringing nature into our homes, especially in places like Colorado or Maine, where uh, it's a little chilly
Yeah,
for
a
a
little bit.
portion of the year, you know. I'm not shy about, like, I have seasonal affective disorder, you know, like I
Yeah.
took a couple vitamin C or vitamin D gummies before I signed on to do this little
Yeah.
podcast,
Yeah.
just because, like, you know, I gotta get my vitamin D for the
Yeah,
day,
sure.
Mhm.
because the sun set at 3:30, you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
um Keeping animals at home gives us a way to bring nature, to have a consistency of nature in our lives. And for me, that is a reminder that I am part of nature, you know.
Mhm.
If I can have that little slice of a stream bed in my living room, or a 13-pound tortoise, like ramming me in the ankles while I'm cooking breakfast in the morning, um, it
Yeah.
just helps me put everything into perspective, you know. Like I said, like, I've been interested in animals my whole life, and it's just that, like, that's what the only thing that's ever really meant anything to me.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, I know I joked earlier that nothing means anything, but like the fact of the matter is, things mean what you make them mean to you, right? You
Mhm.
Sure.
know, and for some of us, it's lizards and snakes and frogs, you know. Those might not mean a lot to anybody, but they
Yeah.
mean a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it means a lot for me to be able to experience them in my house, be it in a picture in a book, or on my phone, or the living, breathing thing. Even though I don't currently keep the living, breathing thing in a lot of regards in my house, um, I still, a big part of me not having them in my house is that I have them at work, and I do it. I still get to experience
Yeah.
that every single day. You know,
Yeah.
um, does that
That's,
make sense? It's
yeah.
a reminder of my place in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
No,
love
that's
that
awesome.
answer.
I really like that.
I love
Yeah.
that answer.
That's
You know,
fantastic. I think that particular response is like a great point to like close out the show.
yeah,
Do you guys agree with that? Is that all right?
that works for me. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I want to
There's
be.
definitely.
Yeah, go ahead, Roy. Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say, yeah, there's definitely a lot of good food for thought in this conversation for me, and
Yeah.
I just appreciate a lot of what you've shared in terms of your perspective and experience, Colin.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
thank
Yeah,
you.
I
No, it's
second.
been an honor.
Yeah.
Like, I was telling some friends of mine, like, I was going to be on this podcast, and they were like, "Who else has been on it?" I'm like, "Oh, you know, just like Ron St. Pierre, or like the guy that wrote your leopard gecko book when you were a kid, you
Yeah.
know, like, and then your boy."
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, boy.
truly an honor to stand on the same podium as those people,
Oh
for
yeah.
real.
Yeah, man.
Hey, we're psyched you could come on. We really appreciate it. You know, we really like to get as many perspectives on this as we can, and you know, and of course, you know, you just got to. It's one of those things where the more perspectives we can get, the more I'm gonna learn, and like
Mhm.
so much of this show is selfish, you know, like I'm just trying to learn as much as I can and talk to interesting people. So
No,
I
same.
yeah, I'm super psyched that you took the time to hang out with us, and I know especially in Maine, you're a little ahead of us in time too. So we really genuinely
Oh yeah,
appreciate
Yeah.
that
I
you took.
forgot about that part. No, it's cool.
Well, that's
It's all
good. I'm
good.
glad you forgot about it. That's the idea. I would hate to
Yeah.
around. But yeah, thank you again so much for taking the time. Let me go ahead and hit the stop recording button.